Hey, what's happening everybody? Hope you're doing okay. Quick one on yesterday's video. A few people in the comments thought that was a bit negative from me, talking about some of the challenges that Formula One faces, not necessarily the obvious challenges, but the less obvious challenges in getting some racing happening as early as the start of July. I certainly didn't mean it to be a negative video. I want F1 to be back, believe me, as much as anybody does. I'm just pointing out some of the views, not even all of them my views, some views of other people that I know in the sport, or people that have contacted me that work in the sport that have some of those opinions. So I'm kind of just putting those forward. So I hope you don't think that was too negative. Today we'll try and bring it back up again. And so today what we're going to do is, as I did this last week and it worked quite well, I'm going to use the Seedstream app. And for those of you who want to use the Seedstream app, I'll put a link in the description of the video, so if you want to download that, it's a great app. And one of the things that it does is every day it gives a news roundup of everything that's happening across Formula One, from podcasts to videos to tweets, Instagram posts, written articles from all sources, and puts them all in one handy little bite-sized chunk in this app on the phone. So I find it really useful, and I thought it's quite useful for doing a little video like this where we can go through the little summary of each of these news updates and then perhaps expand on some of them as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on all of these things as well. So we'll open up the app and we will start with the first one that starts like this. German publication Bild has been labelled as fake news by Italian GP official Angelo Damiani after a calendar was published which claimed the race at Monza would not be part of the revised 2020 schedule. He goes on to say, "We are convinced that our Grand Prix will be there, although almost certainly behind closed doors," he said. So that is a very strong hint that the Italian Grand Prix will form part of whatever a 2020 calendar could look like. We already know that the targeted calendar will start in Austria on the 5th of July, probably with 2 races behind closed doors. It will then move to Silverstone, where they may well do 2 more races, also behind closed doors, and it will then move to other undisclosed circuits within Europe. The Italian Grand Prix now looks to be one of those. I would say that's a great move. Again, a massive shame if we can't have fans there, because we all know that some races in particular, Monza being one of them, are where the fans, and Silverstone's another one by the way, where the fans add such an amazing sense of atmosphere to the occasion. But if we can't have fans, but we can do racing somehow, I think we'd all take that over no racing at all. So great that Italy seems to want at least to be part of whatever this calendar might look like on different dates than were originally scheduled, and without fans there. He does interestingly go on to say, obviously it's a sacrifice for us to not have any fans there. We've got no interest in organising a Grand Prix without an audience for many reasons. So we're looking for a squaring of the circle, given that the missing audience is a component of our total revenue, and that is a problem. And he's talking about Liberty essentially paying the circuit to offset any lost revenue from a lack of fans. And that's something that Liberty have got a big challenge on their hands to try and do. He says there's no way they can run in reverse. The circuit just simply isn't geared up. It would cost too much money to adjust things like gravel traps, curbing, barriers, marshal posts and all those kind of things. And then it goes on in the same article to talk about Hockenhiem, who also are part of this conversation. Hockenhiem, don't forget, were never supposed to be part of the 2020 season, but interestingly, they are talking to Formula One about staging a race in these difficult, unprecedented circumstances. Perhaps because there might be some financial incentive from Liberty, from Formula One, for them to do that, whereas there may not have been under normal circumstances. So we may well yet see a German Grand Prix in 2020. Moving on. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff continues to arouse speculation over his long-term future after revealing that his attendance at every race this season is not guaranteed. Lots of talk, hasn't there, about what Toto might be up to, particularly given that he's just invested in Aston Martin, particularly that he missed a race last year, if you remember, the Brazilian Grand Prix, which was unheard of in terms of for him. But what he says is, for the 2020 season, I'm team principal at Mercedes, even if I may divide my time differently and not be at every race, he told the Österreich newspaper. I want to do my part to ensure that Lewis Hamilton wins the 7th title. So I think that's quite interesting. He says, for the 2020 season, I'm team principal of Mercedes. That doesn't necessarily commit him very long term, does it, in that comment? So there may well be some truth that he's planning some kind of exit strategy, but we know, at least given that quote, for 2020 he's not going anywhere. 2021 and beyond though, who knows? Sort of adds fuel to the fire a little bit, doesn't it? McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown has called on Ferrari to release the details of the settlement agreement it entered into with the FIA regarding the legality of the SF90's power unit. The 7 non-Ferrari teams issued a joint statement demanding the settlement to be made public in the wake of its announcement, but Mercedes has since pulled out. Brown told motorsport.com, I'm all for having ethical duties, and along the lines of ethics, I think it would be great if Mattia Binotto would share with us, as the FIA has volunteered to share, what the details were behind the secret agreement that they came to over the alleged breach of allegations around their engines. That story is not going to go away. It's definitely been buried for now because of what's going on, but that story will be back. There are still a number of parties, led at the moment by Red Bull, but Zak Brown now piling in as well, who are not satisfied with the answers that they have from Ferrari or the FIA. So expect that one to rumble on as and when it's appropriate for them to do so. F1's plans to limit wind tunnel use and CFD development work for those higher up the pecking order in the championship will not result in the performance of every car becoming equal as seen in other series, according to Haas team boss Gunther Steiner, who believes the regulation would help, though, to level the playing field. So this is an idea that's being talked about, that where you finish in the championship the year before determines how much usage you're allowed of your CFD systems and your wind tunnel. Those systems are already heavily limited, but they're the same for every team. And what they're talking about is adjusting that. So if you finish lower down the championship, you might get a little bit more usage from your tunnel or your CFD programs to allow you essentially to do more development and therefore catch up. It seems like a pretty sensible idea, doesn't it? If you're looking to try and level the playing field, things like that at the moment are what set big teams aside from small teams. Not in the terms of how much usage they're able to do, but how much resource they're able to put into that. Who has the best equipment? You know, who has the most efficient use of it? Who has the maximum number of people able to work on those systems? Well, you can't change that necessarily with this regulation, but if you can allow those smaller teams to get more usage out of it, it may well help just to close that gap a little bit. So it seems like a sensible thing to me. Now, Gunther goes on to talk about some of his role within Haas. He talks about how he thinks that that's a good idea, but he also goes on to talk about why he kept Romain Grosjean, given that he had a terrible season last year. He talks about Grosjean not being to blame for that. The car was terrible, so it would have felt improper to sack the driver, which would give the impression that they were the reason they had such a disastrous season. So a pretty fair summary of the fact that he says the blame was firmly to lie with the team and not its drivers, which is why he decided to give them an extra chance. And it goes on to talk in the same article about Kevin Magnussen, about his virtual racing on simulators, why he's not taking part. But one line that I just thought was quite interesting, he says, when I get home to Denmark, I'll start training in a go-kart. So that's how he's going to get back into racing. Said Magnussen, and this is the bit that made me laugh, said Magnussen, who's currently aboard a yacht with his wife and friend off the Swedish coast. Now, the reason that made me laugh is not because he's isolating on a yacht. I mean, that sounds like perfection. With his girlfriend, sounds awesome. But also with a friend. Who's this third wheel that's on a yacht with Kevin Magnussen and his girlfriend? Esteban Ocon says there'll be no margin for error in 2020 due to the reduced number of races, and therefore consistency will be a better course of action rather than attempting high-risk strategies. A contrasting point of view to Ferrari's Charles Leclerc, who recently suggested the exact opposite. Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? How will teams play this, given that we may well have a reduced number of races? Does that mean that it's going to be better to keep consistency, to try and constantly be picking up points? Or does every race count so much that you've just really got to go for the win on every single occasion? I think that's going to be quite an interesting power play, quite an interesting variation in mindset amongst teams as we go through this, what could be a very strange season. One to keep an eye on. Right, let's finish with this one. Danny Kvyat says his focus for when the season eventually gets underway will be on his current team rather than looking to land himself a seat at Red Bull, acknowledging the constant pressure he's under from Helmut Marko. So, Danny Kvyat, do you see him as a potential Red Bull driver again at any point? For me, I'm not so sure, but I'd love to know what you think. Does he feel pressure to be constantly I'm sure he feels pressure to be constantly pushing for that seat, because that, of course, is what Helmut Marko is looking for from all of his drivers. But is he ever going to achieve it? Is he one of those drivers that Red Bull could see as a potential future world champion? Personally, I don't think he is, but I'd love to know your thoughts on this. And if he isn't, should Red Bull be keeping him in that Toro Rosso seat? A seat that's an incredibly valuable proposition for any young driver trying to break into Formula One. Is he there because Red Bull don't have another potential future world champion waiting in the wings? I'd love to know your thoughts on that and on any of these stories, so please do drop me a line. I do really love the engagement that you guys give to this channel. It makes it what it is, and I'm really appreciative of it. So I'd love to know your thoughts on any of that stuff. I've already filmed this morning the next Tales in the Treehouse. Tried to get it done before the rain started pouring onto the treehouse, making a right racket. So you'll see that later in the week. Shall I tell you what it's about? It's about Lewis winning his first world title in that amazing race in 2008. So if you want to see that, don't go anywhere. Perhaps subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and I'll be back very soon with another video. For now, I'll see you later. Ta-da.